Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Hunt Library. Welcome to this latest event in the University Library's speaker series. I'm Keith Webster, Dean of University Libraries, Director of Emerging and Integrative Media Initiatives, which probably means more to most of you than it does to me, but if somebody can give me an interpretation later, that would be great. I'm not going to say much, which will be a relief to many of you. I did want to thank my colleagues who were involved in making this evening's event possible. Heidi, Shannon, Dom, Andy, and somebody else involved. Dave for turning up with the laptop, and Jill was making buttons and badges, which you can pick up at the end. Thank you, Jill. So a large part of the momentum behind this event came from Andy Prisbilla, and Andy has been absolutely fantastic in pulling together a lot of our work in this space over the last couple of years. So it's absolutely fitting that he should introduce Craig and tee up the evening's presentation. So Andy, thank you for all you've done. Grab the mic and take us away.
My people, how you doing? Thank you for coming. This just proves my point that films bring people together, so I really appreciate you all being here tonight. So welcome to the second installment. And before I begin, just because of Baldwin's availabilism, I printed my speech on a recycled piece of paper, so you're going to be learning about that. Okay. So welcome to the second installment of the University Library Speaker Series. Our first installment took place last semester with guests Ingrid Schaffner and Elizabeth Tufts Brown from the Carnegie Museum of Art, and they spoke about the history of the Carnegie International. That talk was organized by our assistant archivist, Kate Barbera, and if you'd like to view it, you can see it on our official library YouTube page. You should definitely check it out. Before we begin, I want to give a big thanks to the library, of course, for giving me the opportunity to invite our speaker tonight. And I want to give an even bigger thanks to our marketing and communications director, Shannon Riff, and designer Heidi Warren-Bartlett for having the faith and the patience in me to pull this off. So thank you very much. I'm really excited about our speaker tonight. He comes to us from San Francisco, California, and joins us as part of our annual Fair Use, Fair Dealing Week celebration here at the library, where institutions celebrate the importance of fair use in copyright and intellectual property for educational purposes. He's a found footage filmmaker, collage essayist, folk archivist, media archaeologist, and curator for over 30 years of the weekly experimental film series Other Cinema, which has showcased the works of artists like the Yes Men, Martha Colburn, Greta Snyder, Bill Daniel, and hundreds of other artists all over the world. His own work in found footage filmmaking and collage not only subverts the documentary format through the use of alternative and hidden histories, but also critiques a host of subjects such as conspiracy theories, mainstream media, and intellectual property rights. His films, such as Tribulation 99, Spectres of the Spectrum, Sonic Outlaws, and Mock-Up on Moo, have been screened all over the world and should be sought out by everyone here tonight. That's a definite. In the year 2000, I took classes at Pittsburgh Filmmakers and was introduced to Craig's films through their experimental film course. And it changed the way I thought about cinema and what movies could be, and it opened up a lot of doors for me. If it wasn't for Craig, I wouldn't know about any other underground filmmakers, to be honest, and probably wouldn't be interested in the subjects that I'm into. I think the most important gift any artist can give someone is the feeling that they can create art themselves. And Craig's work did that for me, and I hope you get the same feeling too tonight. So without further ado, here's to present his lecture demo, Orphan Morphin. Let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Craig Baldwin. Thanks.
By the way, speaking of the Yes Men, one of them is in the audience tonight. But I'm not going to tell you who it is. Also, I'd like to say that when I gave this presentation at Ann Arbor, it was an earlier version of this. It was called Masochism of the Margins, rather than Orphan Morphin. And as people were entering, many more people at the Ann Arbor Film Festival than here, like maybe 500 people. For about the hour that they were coming in, that was the word masochism that was there on the screen. So that's my little joke, I guess. You're going to have to put up with that. There's parts of this that are changing all the time, and you're not necessarily going to see every screen, if you understand what I mean. Sometimes I'll skip forward, and I certainly hope there's no technical problem. It's kind of as PowerPoint, sorry. It's kind of a little bit of a free-form rant that's kind of sparked by these individual words here that everyone complains about being written too large. That's my style too, so sorry about that. The thing is, there are clips coming up, and they're a variable quality. It's not about high quality that I'm really talking about. It's more about lo-fi, actually, accessibility, and availabilism, as Andy said. This discussion starts with maybe 10 minutes of this introduction of these terms, and then we move into clips. The last part of it, I don't know how long it goes, hour and a half or something like that, will be mostly motion pictures. So again, you don't have to put up with me for too long. I just want to kind of, introduce the players and then put them in motion. The very last part of it ends up with a review of my own films, and we don't necessarily have to go there either. See, that's my option of stopping or cutting those things off. You understand? Because then it would turn into a filmography, and that's all right. But I don't think that's necessarily why everyone's here. I think this is, as I said a little earlier today, kind of a opportune crossing of the worlds of the library science and archiving, and the world of cinema. So I am coming from the world of cinema and art more than libraries. I don't know that much about it, but these issues have become very pertinent, and so I think it's a happy crossing, shall we say, of these two disciplines. We're going to, I guess, proceed with this remote. I'm not quite used to working this way. Does everyone know what that would be a silly question. An orphan, which I'll explain to you, is a film that's fallen into sort of by the wayside, into disuse, because its original producers have died. This is the case with a lot of educational and industrial makers from the 50s and 60s who were making films for schools, and the motion picture technology of the day was 16 millimeter, and then when there was a changeover, I guess you'd say in the 90s, to CD and to whatever now, these films became sort of, here's the big word of the day, obsolete, and sort of in the way. And many libraries and schools didn't know what to do with them. And so, well, that's the question, what should we do with them, or old books for that matter? So, in a lot of cases, they're picked up by scavengers, so cannibals, poor people like myself, poor makers, poor filmmakers, who find some use, in their perforated materiality, as I call it, in the beauty of their being able to handle them and have a little fun with them and not feel so precious with them as in the case of let's say, some film that they ran through a camera. So when you say orphan, in morphine, we're talking about, again, morphine changing, redeeming, uploading, uplifting, recycling, upcycling, repurposing, remixing these films, otherwise marginalized. In my own basement, I have, say, 4,000 of them. And they're coming in all the time, more and more. My thing is the snowball effect. Once you have, say, 1,000, then you're going to get more and more, because the greater heft of that snowball, more people are going to know about your collection. And then since they only have 2 or 3, or they're moving out of town or something like that, they'll give you those 2 or 3. And so I can't really keep up with them anymore. So it's a big problem for me. Jesus Christ, will you guys help me? I don't know. I'm trying to do the best thing I can. We're trying to make some points here out of it. But for me, there's hardly any place in my studio anymore, and I keep tripping over them and so on and so forth. So we try to do the best thing. And of course, they're useful in film classes and so on and so forth. So, so much for the long-winded explanation of the title of my piece, Riff and Morphin. Now, we can talk about the avant-garde, and I will for a very short period of time. But again, my focus is not so much on form per se, but on subcultures, frankly. And I mentioned this a little earlier about the poor people and marginalized people and makers who want to use some platform for expression, maybe new ideas, making something new out of the old, so to speak, and new wine in old bottles. Avant-gardes, however, must be addressed in terms of this tradition of collage that I'm part of. See, so this tradition, I guess you could say, you could make an argument, has been around for a longer period of time, ever since maybe printing itself. Decoration, let's say, wallpaper, but it was a kind of a folk collage thing that was happening, certainly in the 18th and 19th century. But it really broke big, so to speak, in the early part of the 20th century, with, of course, the urbanization we see, especially in Western Europe, modernization, advertising as a industry, and of course mass literacy. And as the surfaces of our cities became covered with pictures and words, a kind of an art form developed out of it. You could say it was Cubism. You could say it was not surrealism, Dadaism, and these various avant-gardes found their way of using this material to create something new out of it. It's also true that I can't. Okay, Dada, as I said. So it's also true that, of course, Dada people were not only generally opposed to World War I, where they against which they protested, and many left Germany and went to Cabaret Voltaire in Switzerland. Again, a little bit of a fine art historical footnote. But they also were opposed to the older ideas of art themselves, not only national wars of imperialism, but also 19th century ideas of beauty, of landscapes and portraiture of the rich, shall we say. So when they chose the newspapers of the street, so to speak, to remake into new things and often anti-war messages in a lot of cases, this new collage form blossomed and grew. It's also true that there was another reiteration of this in the post-war era here in the United States and, of course, worldwide with Fluxus. This idea being the flow, the change, the transient, the ephemeral, not the marble sculptures of former centuries, but again, the speed of news, with the speed of the photojournalism, a new kind of combination could be made, a new kind of art form that was more about ideas rather than fine materials. Pop art, we see this, in fact, directly coming out of Fluxus in terms of the Black Mountain College, if you're familiar with that. You might know the Horace de Kooning, by Horace de Kooning, Rauschenberg, right? And this idea of this critique of the older masters and towards a new appreciation of the public space where new ideas of beauty were emerging. Okay, but again, the subculture, more important to me as far as a generating impulse towards reuse of impoverished materials. Beats were particularly important, and especially because I'm from San Francisco, and my teacher was Bruce Conner, who we'll see a little later. This idea of the, I guess you could say, the impoverished, the marginalized, finding beauty in the old wine bottle and or the dime or cigarette butt in a gutter. Maybe that's a romantic idea, but certainly this kind of removal away from the institutions of power or the consolidation of the art world and finding a position outside and kind of a critical position Hippies, of course, now again, a subculture that also has a tradition with collage and with popular forms. And punks, of course, the generation I'm from, which is an effort to, again, is sort of invigorate graphic design based on force of the imagery and bold graphic typography and those the things that are identified with a punk rock poster. Of course, I'm not in your way here. All right, so hackers, okay, if you had to continue this argument about subcultures, it would be endless, of course. But just to update it, in other words, people who didn't identify themselves so much with a art movement, but with a grouping within larger society and kind of consolidating their own identity outside of it and in a critical way, almost in an attack mode. Okay, women, again, so on, gays, lesbians. What I'm trying to do is talk about, this is the part that I'm kind of skipping through here, to think about makers like artists not as a elite group, but really as creativity coming from different parts of society, not necessarily associated with fine arts. Regionalism, okay, now, again, this idea of breaking down the larger what do you call it, the establishment of international culture, modernism, again, we talked about where there would be certain styles, but rather to break down the styles, that would create a kind of an expression that was true to where the geography, and I'm so aware of this being here now, of course, being from the West Coast. And so I valorize this idea of regionalism, even though it's, of course, complicated, but there could be a variety and a diversity and a depth and a breadth of different kinds of expression. Psychogeography, and more or less what I just said. The idea that there could be a certain sensibility that would come out of a certain area. And not only that, but this anticipates the situationist discussion that's going to come up a little bit about the idea that, that there is an experience that can be gained through an embodiment in a particular geographic area. As we know when about the stories of the Guy Debord, wandering through the streets of Paris, through the old town, later bombed and remodeled into U.S.-style shopping malls. Mission School, okay, now I'm proud, see, because I live in the Mission. And that's a neighborhood in San Francisco, in case you didn't know. And it's a working class neighborhood, just so you know, Latino neighborhood, just so you know. So we're doing our thing, we're doing our collage thing, right? That's what I'm talking about. We're doing our mural thing, we're doing our graffiti thing. I mean, not that these are new ideas to you, no, but it became known as the Mission School. It's not my fault. And the reason is because there was an engaged bunch of people who, identified with the neighborhood. Not that this just happened in San Francisco, no, but expressed their work outside of the galleries and outside of the museum culture, but put their work and their expressions on the walls of the city, and not as art, by the way, but as a reflection of the sensibility. And the Mission School, was unstoppable in terms of the art world. Again, I shouldn't be bragging about that, but they came to dominate the last, well, maybe not the last 2 or 3, but 2 or 3 Whitney biennials in a row. Right, so everybody is looking at graffiti now, going, isn't that beautiful? But and that's one way we can understand it, sure. But that's, again, not the way, the best way, according to Craig Baldwin. The best way is through its authenticity and through its the way it gives clear expression to a certain sensibility of a certain time and a certain place. And the Mission School sort of, whatever, blew up, so to speak. And or Twist, if you know him, or his name, I mean, and maybe it's not a good thing, that they succeeded in the art school, but it's part of art history now. So this is the tradition I'm part of. You understand that taking, again, just degraded, distressed materials and transforming them, sending them, bringing them in, redeeming them again into a kind of a raw beauty. situations, as I said, these are all, I'm just riffing off, the players here on the team, so to speak, huge influence, and certainly associated with the punks, as I'm sure we all know, and that is to say, people who were between the world of art and between the world of militant politics, who developed a body of practice and theory that used a lot of collage. Again, not self-consciously, but as a shortcut to making points by using cartoons, for example, with dialogue bubbles with different material in them. So that's a little bit what I'm working towards right now. Guy Debord, I guess you'd say the guy I just talked about, probably you could have to consider the major theorist of the Situationists who propounded this idea of psychogeography, propounded this idea of collage, and propounded this idea of hybrid philosophy between the disciplines. Détournement, in fact, is a term that comes from the Situationists, and you can see, of course, the word detour right there. So pardon my French and all that, but this is the idea of taking a pre-made cultural expression and to hijack it, to kidnap it, and take it off its course, and take it to a new end, take it to a new meaning. And this, I could say it's a strategy, or if not, I think it's a tactic. Oh, here we go. See if this works.
La commune est pas
I had to keep some glitch in this one just because I like Emma Goody.
La théorie révolutionnaire se transforme. Il paraît que leur dernière trouvaille est de détourner les masses médias. Ces détournements m'inquiètent.
Ça, mon vieux, c'est le début de la fin. Ce qui m'inquiète le plus dans cette pratique, c'est qu'ils sont bien capables de faire des copeaux avec notre langage de bois, et même de la cire de bois.
Faut faire attention. Que faire, comme disait Lénine? Oui, Lénine. On a beau être la classe dominante, on est souvent dans la merde. La gueule. Tout dans la gueule. Plus on leur raconte des histoires, plus on les habitue à notre gueule.
On a résolu pas mal de contradictions propres au capitalisme d'État, mais pas celles qui risquent de nous balayer.
On a beau avoir notre gros cul dans l'eau tiède, notre idéologie refroidie.
All right, well, yeah, again, sorry for you being the lights on or off, but the glitch in there, I decided to include it. It won't be so easy to find, by the way, an analog video copy of this piece, which is called Can Dialectics Break Bricks? It's actually by René Vianney, not Guy Debord. The point is, the gang of them were developing this kind of a form of political critique. This would be late 60s here, as a way of a kind of a perverse revenge, you can almost say, against the original cultural producers. In this case, René Vianney was bilingual, and I think he was actually translating, kung fu, Hong Kong chop sake movies or whatever, genre movies, exploitation movies, marginalized Z movies for the French market. So he had access to the kind of technology to do this kind of thing. So this is a film called, I think, The Blow or something like that, which is actually a kind of a martial arts thing that's set, I think, a relationship between, could be, I think, the Japanese and the Chinese many centuries ago. But the point is that, again, just switching out of the soundtrack enables us to, again, rather than read the critique, which is perfectly all right, being a library, all that, but I'm saying another way to do that is to embody it in a kind of a narrative, not only a narrative, but a bad narrative, you understand, a popular narrative, populist narrative, and then to actually give it a little bit more of, well, certainly a comic turn, see? So not to have to explain this to you, but it's a discussion about Stalinism, state capitalism, Maoism, and so on and so forth, but it's told in this, patently absurd environment. So it's a fantastic, it's fantastic feature film that was sort of, again, done in illegally, I'm sure, in a gray zone, and I guess you could say he's brought over here and translated by Keith Sanborn, if anyone in the house is familiar with Keith out of Princeton. But so that's Détournement. And the reason I actually pulled that clip is because you hope maybe you could read the subtitles. The word détournement is in there. So again, there's self-consciously, whatever, self-critically acknowledging this is a strategy by which we can win hearts and minds. All right, so the Society of Spectacle, that's the name. We're in it, in case you didn't know, and we're living through it. And that's the not only the idea from Guy Debord, but this is that's sort of the primary, I guess you could say, volume of situationist thinking. Electronic folk culture. Okay, now again, pardon my name dropping here, but this is an idea. If the situation is to the 60s, this is kind of more or less us to the 80s or 90s, as if there could be a revisiting of this moment of sharing and generosity and folk relations in the new era of electronic media availability. Like people of the 19th century sat around the campfire singing songs and sharing songs and not worrying too much about who wrote the song, Here She Comes Over the Mountain, or Happy Birthday for that matter. People have heard all these discussions around, of course, intellectual property and the owners of the copyright of those songs, taking campfire girls to court and stuff like that. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Well, since we do have, now, computers, but even back then, audio cassettes and so on and so forth, telephones, that there could be this possible revisitation of this moment around the campfire, so to speak, like we are now, actually. Though around electronic campfire where we could share ideas in the same kind of spirit, leaving aside the prerequisites of capitalist culture, shall we say. Bricolage. So again, more of this French term, maybe this idea about the bringing together these disparate objects into a new whole, which could whatever made up. The sum would be greater than the parts, if you see what I mean. That there could be a kind of a raw art brute or outsider kind of quality to a kind of a assemblage and a sculpture that was made out of parts that wouldn't normally go together or wouldn't necessarily fit together. But there could be a kind of a aesthetic of raw, direct, honest, vivid experience. Okay, I'm sorry if I push it. Cinema Povera. This idea is one of my neologisms, by the way, and is related to the idea of art Povera, which I can see is you all got to get a preview there of the next one. So art Povera, well, again, this idea of distressed materials, of artists with no means, and I'm kind of doing it out of order now. So after the war, we see and understand the tradition of sculpture in Italy, of let's say the block of marble, and the beauty of the perfect male body or female body, and that after the war, what kind of art would we expect? Or what would be the best? By the way, this to rehash the older ideas, the classic or neoclassic ideas. I don't think so. I mean, that's what I'm making my argument here. I think it would be the rebar, the gravel, the brick, the concrete. Yeah, that's what we'd be making our sculpture out of. Not the classical marble anymore, because no one had means to the marble. See, so that's why I coined my own term, say, cinema Povera. This idea that we can't pretend to be entitled or privileged to have access to the best materials. We work from where we are. That's what the situation is, by the way, and with the materials that are available to us. So, that's the reference to the formal art historical term, art Povera, by the way. Availabilism, another way of word I made up, but of saying what I just said. That is to say, if curiosity and creativity certainly would be the ultimate deciders of if a piece of work was made, not necessarily a limitation of monies. So to you work with the material available would not only be a way through, but also would bespeak of this situation of the artist. See? So archives. Now we're finally getting around to the library here, okay? So the idea that we treasure what came before. We're not into a complete, utter addiction to the new, or are we? So I'll leave that question unasked, but I'm not. And I think the archives are important, and this whole building is dedicated to the thought of people who came before, I dare say. And it's important that we cherish this, and we honor this, and we preserve it. Folk archives, same thing goes though, but it doesn't have to be institutionalized. It's okay that it's in the centers of what do you call it, intellectual culture, the universities and museums, but it's also more important that each and every individual or household or family or cell or commune or collective would it be able to create its own folk archives, so that it would have its own history, and they would honor its own legacy, and that they would preserve and cherish his or her or its own records. You understand? And that these would be unique, personal, singular, depending on what group was concerned. In other words, what was important to them, and so it would be more honest. Not that anything's wrong with the public. I mean, that is to say, the institutional ones, but every person might want to be having her own archives. Of course, increasingly these are becoming dematerialized. Of course they are, and maybe that's a good thing, and maybe that's a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing. But so I'm very much into this idea of being an analog artist. That's my whole argument here, is that I think it's great that people collect their records and collect their audio cassettes, and you know, or their 8-track tapes are great, by the way, and that there can be this little mini culture within everyone's little closet, and that's kind of the way I think you can make a film, in a way, by not having to go to the archives. I mean, the official, again, institutional archives. Commons. Okay, so again, this is the idea that just like the world of parks came up a little earlier today, and natural reserves, public parks, that we would have a public commons and a place where ideas were available to everyone on a democratic basis, that was not privately owned, and that everyone had a right to frolic across. Okay, here we go. Here's something about the commons.
Creativity always builds on the past.
So anyway, just so you know, the idea of the Creative Commons is a latter-day idea. You know, the idea as time has come. I'm going to make that argument to you right now, and that there would be an alternative to copyright, that someone would make something just for their own, exclusively for profit. Well, and in fact that there would be, that we could actually share a kind of this utopian, admittedly, idea in which that the articles of human history and human knowledge could not only be honored in an archive, but also could be made available for reuse and remixing. And the copyright law, this is kind of confused me because I was just talking about this all afternoon, certainly has its limitations. And copyright limitations. But so I think that there's a new sensibility now. That is to say that we can choose, elect to stamp our work of art a different kind of way, maybe not just with a C, but with a CC. Well, of course, there's other alternatives, but the idea that we honor the idea of passing on information, that we're standing on the shoulders of our predecessors, of course, and that people could reuse our ideas. Well, kind of like what you said in the introduction there, Andy. That we acknowledge the fact that that ideas are passed on, and most of the ideas you have are only creations of your own particular mix of other influences or other things you saw and read in your own life. And the very idea of originality itself, oh, this is kind of taboo here, is maybe a little bit mythic. Maybe that what's original is the way that the things are put together, maybe, and it's hard for me to visualize something coming out of nothing, and that really it's just literacy, cultural literacy, visual literacy, cinematic literacy, art literacy, that enables us to be more fluid. Is that the word? You know, more fluidity, more ease with the language, more ability to recognize, and that this could be. There could be initiatives towards this, and that's what Creative Commons is, an idea that came out of Stanford with this guy Lawrence Lessig about maybe 15 years ago. So this is just an acknowledgement of this idea that copyright has, later, we can be better human beings than that, and that one can elect to self-consciously share their work.
We'll be launching the
This is a
largest
good one.
Copyright.
battle in the history of mankind. We're fighting for our right to remix. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our
Piracy.
Independence Day.
Come in.
Elvis.
Pirated copy.
You are expected.
Betty Davis
Is completely controlled by our computers through
Video piracy.
waves. We also control
Jack Sparrow.
with magnetic waves. These
Piracy.
humanoid robots.
can destroy
Moses.
and together conquer the entire Earth.
I am governed by electronics, under orders of our
Video piracy.
controller.
You ask me to marry you under his orders, too?
Oh, no,
Elvis.
that was different. True, I was assigned to spy on you, but you've come to mean more to me than anything.
Tell me about it, baby.
I don't have to tell you how important this assignment is. The future
Video piracy.
may well be in your hands.
Who is on the
Piracy.
side? Let him come to me. You're looking for trouble? You came to the right place. My daddy was a green-eyed mountain jack of evil. My middle name is
Piracy.
Oh, don't you mess around with me.
Really?
Elvis.
Save the melodramatics for your acting classes.
I don't care what
Moses.
says. He's an asshole. You know what I think? I think you ain't nothing but egg-sucking gutter trash.
No. Truce, you guys. Listen, we got a higher purpose here, right? A wake-up call from the Nintendo generation. We demand free access to data.
Fight the planet!
Copyright. It's not dope. It's not new. It's not sexy. It sucks.
Well, yeah. Like I say, that's it. No, I mean, I can leave right there. I hardly beat that. That just sums up, and that's my whole argument right there. That's by Soda Jerk, the two Australian women who now live in Brooklyn, by the way. And this is just one of many movies they made. This happens to be something I made like 5 years ago. They're still very active, and this is called Hollywood Burn. And I was saying a little earlier, so like a 45-minute movie, and the last 10 minutes of it are just the credits. You know what I mean? Just what I mean is the references and the citations of all the clips that were used. So I mean, they're very aware of these issues about citation and quotation, and they respect the original authors. You don't have to do that, but they do that. So you won't see the credits, but that's just an example of how much they are at pains to again, point towards cinema history. And not that I have to tell you what this is, but it's certainly a collage, it's certainly a montage, and it's certainly détournement. That's what it is right there. Turning the original intents, whoever could tell what those were, of course, mostly to make money. The original purposes of those, the pieces, the components of that new mix, to a new purpose. In this case, a critique, in fact, of intellectual property and so on and so forth. And so it's called literally Hollywood Burn. I just, they're my heroes, that's for sure, and it's a wonderful piece. Well, I think we're going to see more of them later. Anyway, the idea again, the public domain, the commons is what I've said. The public domain are those, in the public domain are those works which will come out of copyright. That's an important term to keep in mind. Fair use is our theme night here. The fellow, and this is the fellowship of fair use right now we're having. So the thing is, in case you don't know, this is a little legalistic, is that within the, I guess you could say, province of monopoly that any author enjoys over his or her work, there is a clause, a hole, an exclusion, an exception, which allows other makers to reuse and repurpose the elements in the original work of art, shall we say. That's, just so you know, what fair use is. And that's, of course, part of U.S. legal, the law system. It's different in different countries, of course. But this is a very important idea to us. We've been talking about it the whole time, or I have at least. And so within you have to justify it, I guess you could say, in court. And the justifications are, well, criticism. I guess you could call this criticism. Is it? I'm trying to make it critical. And in other words, I can show this work, you understand, because it's part of a critical project of mine. Scholarship, citation, parody. In other words, there's 3 or 4 enumerated clauses within the U.S. system, but each of the judgment, of course, would be dependent upon which jurisdiction you brought your case to court in. Just so you know. So it's not clear, and again, it's not for me to tell you this is illegal, or a lawyer can't even do that, by the way, before you go to court. And some of this has gone into greater detail in a film I made called Sonic Outlaws, which is about the issue of negative land versus U2. But let's rise ourselves above that a little bit right now, just to say that when we make parodies, that is covered by fair use. You have to understand that. So that's why the people who deserve to be criticized would, of course, they never grant permission for you to use, material in order to be criticized. So that's why it's a great idea, in the U.S. law system, that we have this protection. People who are critics, so to speak, or intellectuals, or academics, or archivists for that matter, all have the right to make parodies of people in power and of people who made earlier works, because there would be no way, so the argument goes, and I believe it, that you could actually parody somebody without making a likeness of that person. You understand? Because you'd say, well, the guy with the beard and the red hat and so on and so forth, wouldn't work. You'd have to actually show a picture of Santa Claus in order to parody, see? So that's why we can use a picture of Santa Claus. It's just a ridiculous example that I came up with. You'd have to literally show it, you understand? Because the parody wouldn't work. You think about it, or not, but a parody would not work unless you had that likeness there. And that's the whole pivot of it, you see? So not to mention my critique of, Shakespeare would not work unless I could quote, To be or not to be. What a stupid thing to say. What an idiot playwright. You'd have to actually say to be or not to be. Understand? Because then no one would know what you're talking about. So don't sue me for writing a review of your play in which I quote, your own writing. So that, I mean, just so you see, that's what some of the provisions of fair use. Okay. Media archaeology. Okay, now we're, again, another chapter here. What we're trying to do is riff through these ideas, these sort of planks of a certain kind of platform that help me understand the world right now. And it's not necessarily by looking forward or for the next new thing or the next gadget or gizmo, but to actually find beauty in something that might be a little old, or a little used, as I say. It has a little rust on it, and has shown some experience as it's passed through the world, some age, so to speak. And it's gained by that. Artists would be able to see that. It's the grain of it, don't you see? And that's the material part of it, that's the death of it. Yeah, that's loss and death. And that's those important issues to some people. And so this idea of media, it's not just about loss and death. No, but the idea that we acknowledge that there's been earlier forms in media, before the PowerPoint, it was X, Y, and Z. And by understanding what kind of changes were made, technological as well as social, we have a better idea of knowing, where we are now. A pretty simple argument, but I think it's true. So dead media, again, here's my necrophilic slide here. We're also very interested in dead media. There's a kind of, for me at least, a perverse attraction to obsolescence, I must say. You don't have to buy into that. All right, cinema concrete, that's kind of what I've been saying again and again. This back to the idea of the recognition of the materiality of cinema, especially among analog filmmakers. There was someone who, we're not going to see her movie right now, who made a movie called, I'm so honored, Craig's Cutting Room Floor. And because I cut out little tiny bits of film all the time, all she did was, not all she did, but it was a great idea. All she had to do, there you go, was just to go down and pick up all the little clips and then just splice them together and then show it as a movie. She made a print, but what I mean is that would constitute a wonderful piece of cinema for a lot of reasons. One of which was this appreciation of the texture of different kinds of film and different soundtracks, because with 60 millimeter we have the optical soundtrack on the side, so that was all printed through, you understand? So it's a collage, but it also has a kind of a sculptural quality, you see, and so that film did very well, by the way, just so you know. So I appreciate what nature has done to artistic materials, and that's kind of the concrete part of it, so to speak. Artifactually, okay, this is kind of that's another kind of wild idea, but it really has to do with the truth, the documentary truth of something can be told in the artifact itself. It's not the only way to do a documentary. That is to say, by picking up the remnants of a performance, for that matter, or of a traffic accident, there can be a kind of a story in there. There can be a history. There can be a telling of what happened, and that the factuality is expressed embodied, so to speak, in the artifact itself. So you can always present, a carving, for example, and you can always explain what it is to the site, and that's appropriate, and that's fine. But also in the carving itself, in the artifact itself, it contains its own history in a way. It's there in the actual strokes and the actual colors and the textures. Found footage. Okay, finally, it took this long to get to what I'm talking about. All that other stuff was just trying to confuse you. But anyway, the found footage, I'm a found footage filmmaker. And the reason I'm here is because I'm familiar with these issues. In other words, I could be another kind of filmmaker, and I would be completely oblivious to them. But don't you see? These are problems not problems, but I mean things that we can work through, hopefully, for found footage filmmakers. And that's the connection I was talking about earlier between cinema and the archives here, because I work with the archives, but again, not in a high-low relationship. My archives are all around me. I'm trying to realize that everything could have a purpose in some kind of collage of mine, and everything is if one had the creativity, one could work something up around it. You know, like the little splinter I see on the ground right there, and that would be a great assignment, I think, for students, if there's any educators in them, is to kind of this idea of an assignment or project based on materials, from materials up rather than the other way down, from again, inherited ideas about art, beauty, but rather than say, well, here's what you have to work with, and let your mind go to work on it, you know, and let's see what you come up with, and kind of setting limitations, you understand, around a project might actually make it better, you know, in certain cases. So the idea of found footage is this kind of self-imposed, what do you call it, exile into a world of poverty, not in my case self-imposed, but in which you have to come up with creative solutions, because of you can't shoot your own material, you have to work with what you have.
Radiografía de la niña. Era de esperarse. La columna vertebral está lesionada.
Quiere decir.
Todavía no se puede decir nada. Es un caso difícil con remotas posibilidades. Además, esa niña no creo que resista ninguna operación. Está tan débil que...
¿Sucede algo más?
No. Pensaba en tu hermana.
Te lo agradezco. Esta mañana hablé por teléfono al sanatorio y parece que está más tranquila.
Hoy. ¿Hablaste hoy?
¿Qué pasa? ¿Me lo preguntas de un modo?
Sí, Laura. Quisiera preguntarte muchas cosas. Es acerca de Vicky. ¿Por qué no me dices toda la verdad?
¿Te la he dicho?
No es cierto. Y yo quiero saber por qué. ¿Me oyes? ¿Por qué?
Enrique.
No está internada como tú me contaste, ¿verdad?
Ya te dije, está en un sanatorio en Cuernavaca.
No es verdad. ¿En cuál? Dime en cuál sanatorio.
¿En el Chulavista? Sí, en el sanatorio Chulavista en Cuernavaca. No te entiendo.
No eres linda vista. Lo hubiera jurado.
¿Qué pasa, Enrique? ¿Qué pasa?
Okay. Yeah, applause, come on. Yeah. Again, I can't follow that act. I just can't follow it. I mean, I rest my case. You know, that's the way I feel about it. It's so brilliant. And I don't have to explain to you why it is, but this really means a lot to me because I'm a found footage filmmaker, first of all. Secondly, because we were just discussing this, of course, with Annie today, because this is just a favorite clip of mine. You know, I can't stay away from it. And because I made a movie with these same actors. In other words, this is the most cheapest kind of Mexican production where you can, you know, cut it up, you know, freely, you know, and so shots not from this film, but from this. It was a studio in Mexico City. It was just pumping them out. You understand, the 50s, and so you know, one could easily come across a print of these actors, you know, and I used it in a film of mine, Tribulation '99. By the way, these same people, and but that's not this movie. This movie, well, I was checking out Walgreens about 2 years ago, and you know they have the little things, candies and things on their way out, and I think it was going for like $2.79. You know what I mean? At Walgreens, believe it or not. In other words, the cheapest you could possibly get a videotape, and you know, that just shows you this, you know, again, this mass culture and mass disposability. Well, anyway, this was made by Scott Miller, just to give credit to him, and he used to be in San Francisco, and he was a lab guy. This is why he knows all about printing and stuff like that, and you know, kind of the backside, you know, of filmmaking kind of thing. And he made it, and this story goes, Bruce Conner, again, whose name I mentioned already, you'll see in a sec, was on his deathbed, and he received this piece from Scott, and it was, you know, it was his favorite as he passed on into heaven, or was it hell? But anyway, it was agreed that this was Bruce's favorite, video collage, of the younger generation, because it was sent by Scott to Bruce as a kind of a gesture of goodwill, and I hope you're doing okay, because we understand this dialogue here. So it's the existential crisis, of course, of the found footage. What is it exactly we are? That's what this discussion is, exactly, is to test and probe and get a sense of what the status is. Again, legally, we're talking a little bit about that. That's not my really expertise, but more about certainly within filmmaking, within library science. Okay.
Jet, U.S. Air Force #1, printed on the side, and the crowd begins its cheer, which you can't hear over the whistle and hum of the jet. But handkerchiefs are being waved, the placards are being held high, and hundreds of tiny American flags are now being waved toward the presidential jet. The doors fly open, and the loading ladders are being wheeled into place. This is a split-second timed operation for the Secret Service and the Air Force and the Signal Corps. Nothing left to chance. Every possible precaution has been taken. The reception line is formed, and there is Mrs. Kennedy, the First Lady, stepping from the plane, wearing a bright pink suit with a dark fur collar and a matching pink hat, and the President, wearing a dark suit, steps off directly behind. Mrs. Kennedy has been presented her bouquet of brilliant red roses, and they make a lovely contrast to the bright pink suit she is wearing. The weather couldn't be better. We have a brilliant sun at this moment. The wind has diminished considerably, and it has turned into a comfortable situation for the hundreds of people who came here to Dallas Love Field to witness the arrival of the President and his First Lady. Now, those of you who are waiting along the parade route, just to be sure that you find yourself in the proper location, let's give it to you once again. The party is now ready to depart.
Okay. Well, that's enough. That's fine. That's a clip. Just so you know, that's from a report. Bruce Conner's one of his films, and again, you don't necessarily have to know all the names here, but he happened to be my teacher, but also he was the focus of a huge retrospective at New York Museum of Modern Art, also in San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, just in the last couple of years, and it's about time is all I can say. And that's just, again, not to tell you something you don't already know, but this is kind of what I'm talking about. This is within the world of fine art. It's, but even if it wasn't, being a beat himself or whatever, a punk, this could easily, have justified, not that it needed to, itself as just be a party film or something like this. But instead, the world caught up with Bruce Conner, so to speak, and recognizes, yes, collage, Dadaist, 20s, sure, next thing you know, we can also have motion picture clips, and we can put motion together and to make something even more sophisticated, something even more complex than flat collage. And not only that, it is not supposed to appeal to the eye necessarily, but it's supposed to provoke ideas and to address the assassination of JFK in an art piece. Well, brave, more power to you. It's certainly black comic and other parts of it, and I think it's a response. I think it's an honest response of Conner himself to the tragedy, but told through public media. You understand? So through these public newsreels, he took back the experience. See, that's what we should all be doing. I would argue that's a wonderful thing. Now, someone was there, Zapruder. Zapruder could make his own film about it. That's for sure. That's true. But Bruce Conner wasn't, and I wasn't, and you weren't. I'm assuming. But we did see this stuff. I mean, some of us did, and so he reclaimed it, and so I valorize that. I think it's smart. And by the way, the first iterations of this didn't look like this. He had 3 black and white televisions with their screens painted white, and then had 3 Super 8 projectors with the newsreel material projected on them. In other words, even more the experience of watching this stuff on TV. But you don't see that version. I mean, it's talked about, but of course, in the catalog and all that. But it sooner or later became a single channel thing. You understand? And this is his, I guess you could say, response. We're used to this now, of course, but in the 60s, early 60s especially, I guess you could say to use a word from the Situationists, spectacularization of history, because of the media becoming so powerful and rich, so dominant and so central position in terms of a discourse that everyone's response to it would be more or less kind of framed and dictated by the media response, of course, and that there would be a certain kind of a loss of analysis, and a loss of depth, and a sort of selling the thing as just a big sound inferior, like I say, a spectacle, at which when it was hard to find the meaning in it, and to finding a meaning in an experience like that, or anything that's happening like every day, let's face it, is a challenge. And maybe artists are better or worse in trying to suggest certain kinds of meanings, even though obviously there's just, you didn't see enough, of course, but not one meaning in here, but many, many meanings. In fact, every second I have a new thought. And that's one definition of good art, if you ask me, at least from coming from cinema. So there's so many ideas here, and because of so many connections between the separate shots, and also this disjunction between the sound and the image, and also the sculptural element too, in the case of the TV sets. And so that's why it's rich. It's in fact a poem. I think it's a great poem. It's a modern poem, postmodern poem, in which an experience that we all have is exploded, just like JFK's brains. And that's the way I look at it. And I hope that doesn't sound too bad of me, but I think that's almost the way that Connor would see it, as what came out of it was everyone has to kind of witness the ugliness of it, you understand? And not turning away from it, and not to make it beautiful, even though there's plenty of moments of beauty in this. But the beauty is in the sublime moments of these tentative relations between any one shot and the next, and any one sound, be it language or another kind of sound, and the imagery, and to create a matrix, like a three-dimensional, to take something flat like a newspaper headlines, and then to recreate an experience in depth that you feel in your body, kind of thing. That's one definition of art. So that's the man, according to me, the man that I wouldn't be here without, just like Andy said, in regard to me. So from Connor to Baldwin to Andy. So there you go. So anyway, the thing is, this is one found footage filmmaker among many that we've seen, 5 so far. But it really kind of that's apropos of the earlier piece that was given to him on his deathbed by Scott Miller. Okay, long story. All right, now here we go. Collage. God, we only got to Collage now? All right. Oh, this is back to, again, a reference to this idea of Max Ernst and the Dadaist, and this idea of moving from, again, flat work. I don't know why I put it together this way, but to the idea of the Dadaist moving to motion picture. And then this kind of, John Hartfeld, my hero, was doing this. Oh, we didn't get media there. Okay, hold it.
images joined together in time, a montage that makes a film. The collision gives a third meaning. 1 plus 1 equals 3.
All right, I can see some of this media is not showing till it's in, but that's okay. There's more than enough. But anyway, what I'm saying is, that is, again, I can see right now that this PowerPoint isn't in, I would have reordered that, but to have this as apropos of this idea of 1 plus 1 equals 3. This is a major idea from any montage maker. And I would have actually, if I redid this, placed it before the Connor thing. But the same principle applies, you understand, is that the idea of collage, montage, film editing is really based on this idea of this expectation that the audience is going to come forward and make a kind of connection, not necessarily the one I dictate to you, but something because you're invited to or forced to, and that you're or seduced into it. But the point is that's the joy of it. You understand? And that we can talk about ideas in cinema, even though you can't really show an idea. Okay, now I mean demonstrate an idea. Let me get this right. I can't prove this to you, but what I'm saying is my idea that abstractions like freedom would be hard to actually show in a concrete visual form, and maybe they shouldn't be, but they can be suggested through something. It's montage through film editing. That you can get to that 3 through 1 and 1 by putting them together in the right place, and also, of course, the audio, as I said, and to create an idea which above, again, these recordings on film. So I think that's what's going on, and this is about Hartfield, who, again, one of my heroes from the Dada period, who escaped to Cabaret Voltaire and all that because militarism and imperialism and so on. And so this is an updating of him from a film called, made by British maker, by the way, a scratch video guy who got a gig from the BBC to make this major thing in terms of this history of famous artists. So Hartfield is my hero because he was very pointedly political. So one could make the argument that all collage has the potential to be political, but Hartfield was the one that really brought that to the forefront. So that's really from a clip of a documentary about Hartfield. Kuleshov effect. We're not going to spend time on the Kuleshov effect. Okay, I'm sorry. That's just one of the ones that's more film-centric. You guys need to know all that right now. Intertextuality. So this is the idea, again, kind of what I've been talking about, but not so much just within film, but also could be within writing, literature, that there would be, let's say, a series of quotations you could make. That's all you've been seeing, by the way. But there would be something besides the content of this clip or that paragraph. There would be a relationship between those components that was kind of on the outside, you understand, on the margins, so to speak, that we would know something about these two things. So I think this is something that's at work, whether we recognize it or not. I'm proposing to you that this is a term you hear increasingly, of course, but it has to do with these new kinds of writing and filmmaking, postmodern, you could say, in which they're not just the element components themselves, but this consciousness that we have that these parts come from different sources, and there was a relationship between them in terms of history or personal biography or so on. And this is a quality that can be exploited. Yes, exploited, like color, or in back in the days of painting, or something, or texture. That intertextuality could be an artistic, aesthetic form and quality to be enjoyed in new kinds of art making. Compilation documentary. Okay, now back to our historical thing here. Now, where does this all come from? Well, as I said, they're documentary makers have needs. I'm an experimental documentary maker. That is to say that I play with the form, I guess you could say. But just like what I'm doing right now, I'm trying to make some points. You can take it or leave it, of course. But there's people who have come before me, and they are sort of a major in this tradition within film that we would understand and know. And the compilation documentary didn't necessarily call attention to itself as being an art form, but rather a way of talking about history. And that is to say, by quote unquote sampling and taking from here and taking from there and through the art of montage to put together sequences, in other words, compiled, you understand? Not all produced by the original maker, him or herself, but that would tell a better story, like what you saw, of course, in the Connor. And this is like the master, I say, and the argument. Well, the originators were the Soviets. That's the Kuleshov effect that I skipped over. But here, in our case, Frank Capra. Oh, please. What
The sweat of the men of all nations built America.
Okay. Does anyone recognize that? That's right. Why we fight. So, again, not to turn this thing to a film history class, but that's required. It's going to be on the test. All right. We're talking about all these artists, these avant-garde guys. Well, hey, don't you think that's avant-garde? That was 1942. Or 3. The point is that I don't want to start my Capra stories. But, you know, Eddie, the Baldwin, the Connor, who's standing on Capra's shoulders? Who's Connor? He was the bad conscience of Capra. That's what I say. Because he was a beatnik, don't you see? Kind of resisting the consolidation and the self-congratulation of the U.S. after the war. And so that Connor had to drop out and all that. But Capra, well, he didn't have to make this kind of movie. He had already made an Academy Award winner after Academy Award winner. Why did he make this kind of movie? Well, we got in the war. the United States did. And what happened was they needed someone to make some propaganda, right? And they hired this guy and said, all right, now you're Lieutenant Colonel Capra, don't you know? He could have gone on making sort of mawkish, corny, sentimental films, not to put him down, but he chooses this other path, right? And, do you think he shot that stuff? The answer is no, he didn't. All the vaults opened wide, because, of course, the war was on. And he's marching down these 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, Paramount, the basements, you understand, the vaults, and doors are flying open. You got it? Anything you want, Lieutenant Colonel. See? So it's a compilation. Again, he didn't invent compilation. But this point was, it's not so much about the history You understand? It's a feeling. It's why we fight. Well, I mean, there's arguments made, and there's words obviously used. There's 6 of these, by the way. But did you hear any words in that 3-minute clip? The answer is no. Well, right at the tail, yeah. Point is, but does everyone know why we fight? Yes. So, mark one up for Mr. Capra. He proved it. He made it. It's this idea of montage. Through visuals, we come to an abstraction. You understand? The idea of freedom, whatever it is, was expressed, or American values, let's say, through a montage of visuals shot by other persons. That's pretty strong filmmaking. And not only that, but it's insanely quickly cut for 1942. And not only that, it has a pop soundtrack, in case you didn't know. George Gershwin. So if that isn't a music video, you tell me what it is. It's not only a music video, probably the most famous of all time, but let's face it, but it's also, well, it's just great filmmaking all around. It's, you know, it's agitprop. It comes from the Soviets, by the way, and it's just quite. It's amazing to see, and I would just say that I honor and I understand the role of compilation documentary in the history of so-called avant-garde underground filmmaking. You know, this idea became available, and it's a lucky chance because, again, this man was given this commission, and the materials became available to him, and through this remixage, he delivered a new and a modern idea. Collage essay, well, that's exactly what I said. I'm talking backwards here. So it's a collage essay. That's one of my neologisms. I made it up. Collage is supposed to be about just energy, don't you know, and relations between shot 1 and shot 2. Well, no. What about this larger idea of actually writing through images and words? You know, that's not bad. An essay. So we can do it. And just as these, if this is an essay or not, just as the parts of this essay are made out of words, in this case, that coming through my tongue, teeth, and lips and reaching your ears right now, just as that, we can also create essays out of the material in the archive. See, that is to say, audio and visual, and not necessarily fall back on language every time. Well, these are languages, of course. They're different from, of course, a written language, but they're also similar in a lot of ways. So I guess you could say that's semiotics. So that's something we've come to understand. But that's something that filmmakers kind of maybe naturally know. Not all of them. All right, collage narrative. Okay, so now we're taking another bend here, and I'm letting you know that not only, this is my challenge, and it's also Soda Jerk's challenge, is that can we propound a point of view, a perspective about history or whatever through remixing older film material, but we can actually tell stories. That is to tell whatever, something with a arc or beginning, middle, end, something that develops over time. And you already saw probably 5 of them, but certainly you saw it with the Soda Jerk thing, because there's an argument between Moses and, you know, and the people, the worshiping down there, and Elvis, and that was the story. You see what I mean? And they told that through not only this collaging effect, but also by this fantastic, you know, switching around transposition of not just a collage between picture next to picture, but also a collaging on the soundtrack. So you'd have a kind of a cross collage, you know, where some of the original audio would be with the original picture, but then again, it would be, sometimes it would be displaced, and that's why you have this cutting in of these, you know, other kinds of sounds. So it's not only a different narration that's written, but also a narration that's heard, and then of course a different kind of narration in the picture track. Not to complicate things, what I'm saying is there's like so many things going on at the same time. It really gets dense, and also it's a mark of fantastic filmmaking. So I'm going to show you.
Once I built a railroad, made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once I built a tower to the sun, brick and rivet and lime. Once I built a tower, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once in khaki suits, gee, we looked swell, full of that Yankee Doodle-Dum. 500,000 boots went slogging through hell, and I was the kid with a drum. Say, don't you remember they called me Al? It was Al all the time. Say, don't you remember I'm your pal? Buddy, can you spare a dime?
Well, anyway, I got some heavy moments here. But that's a film you'll never see. Because, well, you might, actually. And one person told me after one lecture, yeah, I saw that on 2 a.m. on cable or something like that. Well, the point is with a marginalized film. But there's a real lesson in that film. Not for me to dictate it, but there's many. But I'm calling it sort of a collage narrative. What you see here is this crossing of these different kinds of types of film. One, the documentary, the newsreel, the cameras, of course, on top of cable cars, and then all the sound creeps in there. You wouldn't have noticed, not at first, and then all of a sudden you're in a in embodied space, a cinema space, a storytelling narrative space, and so there's this kind of maybe it's a confusion or a very successful fusion, shall we say, between these two traditions, where you don't really know where one leaves off and the other one starts. And it's this guy named Philip Mora, who only made one film. And I think it's fantastic because we all love to see those shots of the hobos, and then next thing you know, one of them's getting hurt. So, it's more, I think it's more meaningful, it's more effective, it's fantastic. And of course, any old narrative film can't include archival shots in it, and that's old news now. But this was one of the first in which, like I say, the whole narrative is driven by people who appear as in his narrative movies, talking about history. See, rather than the other ways around. So to make a compilation of taking an actor, James Cagney, in fact it is, who appears throughout a documentary about the 30s, you understand? So rather than trying to shoot something, actually using a clip, and then it would have the force of documentary truth. See what I mean? But because it could be read that way, because of the montage and the sound and all that. So I thought it was a kind of a marginalized film, or what do you call it, an anomaly, and that actually did have a big effect, because we were talking about this earlier, this film called Atomic Cafe, and which I hope you guys are familiar with and saw. Well, apparently this was a film that blew their minds, the directors of Atomic Cafe. Who would think of making a whole film out of just newsreel clips and not having some narrator drive the whole thing, but just using the native, you understand, audio that was within the clips. And it was this guy, this Philip Mora, who I know nothing about, I think he was Italian, who had this who came up with this very strange fusion and confusion, again, between documentary material and narrative material, and it worked and ended up having the force of factual storytelling. All right, here we go. Factual storytelling. In other words, history telling. All right, here at ventriloquism. Okay, well, God damn it, the yes men just left. I see right now the yes men in the group just left the room, but in fact, he's responsible for this. Okay, so I know a lot of you people are going to know who I'm talking about, but my idea, again, belabored as it's been, has been that we can claim, we have a claim, to not only the books here, to read them and reshape them, cut them up. No, don't say that. No. Okay. In so many words, I Xerox them then. All right, but it's true about this relationship. This is a major difference between cinema and literature. There's another component, audio and visual, and that there can be something done with it by this substitution, good word, of another soundtrack. You understand? It's magic what happens, and filmmakers know this. It's our little trick, to be honest with you. And that's all this stuff you've seen from Soderbergh and so on. Has been this idea of everyone knows the idea of ventriloquism, no, but I'm proposing it to you as a cinematic strategy that we can insert our own voices into the mouths of dead actors. You understand? And make them say different things. Obviously, well, here's a perfect example from the world of commodities. And this is an early project of one of the Yes Men.
Hi, I'm Teen Talk Barbie, the spokesdoll for the BLO. That stands for the Barbie Liberation Organization. We're an international group of children's toys that are revolting against the companies that made us. We've turned against our creators because they use us to brainwash kids. They build us in a way that perpetuates gender-based stereotypes. Those stereotypes have a negative effect on children's development. In order to correct this problem, we have set up our own hospitals where we are carrying out corrective surgery on ourselves. Before surgery, me and G.I. Joe were forced to say things we didn't want to. Though we can't have a totally new voice, we can switch with G.I. Joe and other toys for boys.
There you go. So again, I'm going to have to speed things up a little bit here, okay? We'll be, just so we do 10 more minutes of this stuff, and then we'll have some Q&A, okay? Just so you know where we are. Well, this is, I mean, it's utter genius. Again, you don't have to agree with me. This became part of my film. When I learned about this happening, this was in San Diego, in NorCal, I just was, you're in my movie, for sure. And I folded into my film, Sonic Outlaws. Well, this is a little bit of a cartoon example of what I've been talking about. Of course, I've been talking about more post-production in film. But in this case, you have a little materialization, a concretization of it, you know, a physical, literally a literal ventriloquism, and it just so clearly demonstrates the point I'm trying to make. You know, when we see something that we would consider regressive, like the kind of things that Barbie was saying, and that you see this kind of hilarious switching of ventriloquism, and we say, well, I think that's for the best. That's what I felt about it. And this leads us to a kind of an activism, see? So, again, this is kind of the second to last chapter here, when I'm saying that not only as filmmaking developed a system of archiving, but a system of editing, but also that we can self-consciously use these techniques, shall we say, tricks of the trade, to actually intervene in the larger social field, having to do with toys, for example, behaviors of consumption, and so on, to perhaps raise the values a little bit. And that's why the question is begged of why are we just playing around like this? Again, to confuse people, well, it might be healthy, but no, I'm calling this culture jamming, or has been called culture jamming. And that is to say that we all, as consumers or members of culture, have the right to put a little pressure on a product, you know, and talk back to it, and not just be its slave, sort of slave of Barbie, slave, so to speak. That it's in our world like a billboard. There's another good example of culture term. Talking back to billboards by altering them is something I'm a big fan of, and I've done a lot of. And so this idea of, again, intervening in the larger culture, not just the art culture, popular culture. And there was one we missed, which was interventionist art. So again, within in terms of contemporary art history, we must understand that there is this new kind of activism. The social practice actually is with more familiar term that has to do with working out at the necessary qualities, again, of color and texture, but more about systems of behavior and the market and the marketplace, and that's the street itself would be actually a better place for us to conduct this business rather than a museum. Okay, again, I'm skipping some here. Microcinema is I'm not going to say too much about this because we're kind of running out of time, but I will say that I am a curator of a micro cinema, Other Cinema it's called, in San Francisco, and that's one of the reasons I'm here, not just as a maker. So I'm committed to this idea of bringing even motion pictures, again, out of the larger, what do we call it, malls, and into basements and bookstores and cafes and galleries and storefronts, like I lived in for most, 40 years of my life. Okay, Banana Cinema, Other Cinema, that's my thing, and we're coming to an other zine. This is more self-congratulatory, so I'll skip it. In fact, I think we're going to end about 2 more slides here because, well, it's a pretty good one. Expanded cinema. Let's see. I'm missing the media on this. See, so I'm not complaining. We'll come. It's pretty. This is cinema concrete. This is it. This is it too. So I just want to say a few last things about this, and we'll open it up for Q&A. I really, again, I was bragging about my video glitching a little earlier, but in that case, it didn't help us because it was a very poor quality VHS. But what was going on there, in case you can't see, and it's an important point, is, again, a literal acting out or a physical manifestation of the kind of things I've been talking about, which is, again, reclaiming again, this culture could be of cinema or music, that's for sure, literature, and that what these people have done, which is a group of 3 people, well, one's dead now, in San Francisco, who take, again, the stuff found in the gutter, the throwaways, the old films, the residue, the obsolete films, everything that whatever the marketplace doesn't want, and to kind of reclaim it in a way, and to make some kind of art out of it through this acknowledgement of what it is, the physicality of it, the materiality of it, and the ability to change it, to make your mark on it. And in case you know, again, this is done with analog cinema, but also with digital, of course, but they've got their 3 projectors there. Well, projectors, there's some people in the house that probably has 10 of them. You know, I have about 12 of them. So there. But what I'm saying is that how many radios do you have? How many turntables do you have? You know what I mean? I mean, again, I'm not saying you have to clutter up your house, but I'm not. Well, yeah, you do. No. But what I'm saying is that we're not just going to dispose of those things. See? We're going to make use of those things, not only the software but the hardware. So, not that you don't already know this, but there is this tradition, which is, you know, in the air, very active, especially in San Francisco, the West Coast, of expanded cinema. And that doesn't mean just 3 huge screens behind the Grateful Dead or whatever in a rock hall, but it also means this other way. Don't you see, instead of spectacular, larger, you know, and I'm a light show guy, but bringing it down to like almost someone that's, you know, a musician or painting at a very local level, at a very singular level, and that you could have 3 people on 3 projectors easily, and they could be making loops, and they play loops like on a like a rack, you know, just a hanger with made their own loops, and they can not only create a movie in real time through physical gesture performance, but they could actually work together like a trio, like a band, you understand? And that they could either use the native audio, the optical track that's on the film loop itself, or they could produce their own, or they could, generally what they do is just mediate it, just change it, you know, flange it and reverb it right there at their local station. And that this could be a new kind, it is a kind of cinema, which I'm calling expanded cinema or cinema concrète, where we can not only remake larger films, single channel works, but we can also split films into 3s. And in this case, and everybody can reworking, you know, their set of loops and to create a new ensemble. There's the word. Create a kind of an ensemble, not by playing traditional instruments, but by playing the instruments, you could say, of yesterday, 16mm film and loops. And it's just a delightful and wonderful and what do you call it? Liberating idea to me for these people to step up and be so creative, and not only showing the original picture, but also scratching on it and having our way with it, because we own it, we're reclaiming it, you understand? And then to get on a concert stage before a band, by the way, facing the audience, by the way, with a very lightweight mobile screen that comes in front of them and then to perform, like as the opening set. You know, that's kind of a nice idea, I must say. And I'm going to, before I go into my own stuff here, I'm going to leave it off at that. And I'm just going to say, I try to at least, you know, describe a kind of an arc for you here, starting with, of course, early on, with these basic ideas about collage, but also ending now, I guess you could say, in the real, milieu of the Bay Area scene, at least, hopefully around the planet, where people can not just dispose of culture of just a few years back, but can make creative use out of it and create, in fact, a new art out of it. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. So we're going to open up the floor to any questions. We have about 10 minutes left in our session. So if anyone has any questions for Craig, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I thought that was great. My question has to do mostly with sort of IP aspects. And I enjoyed the sort of backwards narrative there, where we went from punk rock to Frank Capra. But going forward, you know, if we look at that the other direction, we go from agitprop to Frank Capra. We go from hippies to commodified hippies. We go from hip hop to commercial hip hop, punk rock to selling cars. And my question is, you know, you're creating this great art, but once it becomes popular, once capitalism sees that it has a market that they can commodify, and they're going to say that they own those things. And so you've found some great stuff, but then somebody says, hey, that's mine, or that collage, I've paid this other guy over here to make that collage, and I own it. And so how do you deal with that in terms of that cultural transformation when somebody's eventually saying, well, I want to use it to sell a Toyota?
Well, do I get this? Yeah. Oh, no, I'm already mic'd. Okay, here. Okay, first of all, that's a fantastic question. And I'm surprised because I thought I was boring you. So, but anyway, I'm glad you came back. You were paying attention. But it's a rhetorical question because I don't have the answer, and I don't have the only answer, by the way. But those people who enter into those relationships know the terms of their relationship. You know what I mean? It's not for me to tell somebody who sold their song to sell cars to jump off the bridge or something like that. I can't tell them what to do. That's a good question. It resounds over this whole thing, but it's a problem within our culture. Yes. So some people cave. What can I say? Some people sell out. So I'm going to turn my back to them. That's about all I can say.
What do you do? Sorry. What do you do? You found this great piece of it's an art clip or it's a clip that was used in. You found this great clip. It's a clip that's used in school. Now it's being reused by somebody else, and they've purchased the rights to it. And so now you're in this rights thicket.
Right.
And how do you react to that? And what do you do about, because that affects your art, right?
Right. Okay. It would work the other way around. If they're the cultural creators in the first place, those are the people who own it. No one would buy it later on. Don't you see? It's disposable. My whole argument was stuff that's not marketable. It would become marketable when the artist remediates it, and bumps it up, sure. But if there's a problem in the courts, I mean, again, I can't answer that question based on the law. It has to be answered on a case-by-case basis. But it's not like, what I mean is, it would generally work the other way around. That in a way, you could say that artists were sort of exploiting the original makers. You could say that. And of course, it's done all the time in terms of cowboys and Indians or whatever. Mascots and Aboriginal cultures, of course, which is like tattooing or surfing for that matter. Those were all stolen, weren't they? It wasn't practically rock and roll. I mean, this is a huge issue. I'm glad we broached it, but I can't. It's not like a how-to answer that kind of thing. If this is your question, if some original copyright holder of some of the material that I used sued me, well, then I would probably have to. I'm just making this up. I mean, I'd have to. Some people buy the license. That's true. Some people do that, and some people take their stuff out. That's what filmmakers do, in case you didn't know. Some people will say, okay, I'll cease and desist. They'll stop distributing it, or they'll take that part out, or they'll go ahead and they'll license it, or some ignore it. I mean, there's 5 off the top of my head. But I can't speak for artists generally. But as far as this stuff goes, don't you see, the persons that would relicense it would be the artist who wants to exploit it, right? So after I exploited it, the original makers wouldn't re-license it. Don't you see? They're already dead, and they made it 50 years ago. So I don't think they would arise. If there was a claim to copyright, then that would come up. You know what I mean? And that would be through due course, I suppose it would be. Or you could just ignore it and not worry about it. Of course, that's another way to do it, and go. Pardon my language, but fuck off. That's what a lot of people do, that's for sure. But I'm not, again, this discussion came up during the afternoon here. We were talking about fair use and say, well, all these experts are saying, well, copyright has its value. So, again, I understand what copyright is, and I understand it does have value. And if I work very hard on something, maybe I should deserve some reward. So, I actually agree with that, to be honest with you. But I don't think that 14 years should all of a sudden become 99 years in the course of a couple of decades, because certain people we know have the copyright on Mickey Mouse. So I don't know. Great question, but there's no answer. But you can ignore it and be an outlaw, and that's groovy, and that happens a lot, and it's okay with me.
Any other questions on the floor? I think that sums it up.
Oh.
All right, let's have a round of applause for Craig.
I didn't know exactly what he meant. Yeah. If someone sued me, I'd have to.